You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, February 20th, 2025 at 7:36 p.m. Pacific time. And today I thought I might talk a little bit about the dynamics of secure functioning relationships, and in particular around the aspect of safety, or the feeling of safety in a secure functioning relationship. And what I would say is that this is really a conversation about conflict resolution strategies and how they differ person to person. You really grow up in a family system, and for most of us, we observe the way the adults uh, in the environment that we have access to present conflict and then also resolve conflict. And in secure functioning relationships, because the main tenet of the relationship is this agreement where I take care of you in the way that you need to be taken care of, and you take care of me in the way that I need to be taken care of. There is a lot of negotiation around how each person's conflict system operates, and then how do you integrate them. What you'll discover, I think, is that sometimes your conflict resolution system and the other person's resolution system just mesh pretty well. And sometimes you'll find that there's a lot of difficulty in trying to bridge the two different strategies, and so that they can come into agreement. If you're looking at a secure functioning relationship, what you're also looking at is a foundation of epistemic trust. Epistemic trust means that you believe what the person is telling you, and you believe that the reason that they're telling you what they're telling you is meant to be helpful to you, so that there is a consideration of your needs in it, in the expression of that. And when we lose epistemic trust, it means that we either don't think that the person is telling us the truth, or we don't think that they have our interest in mind. And at that point, you can't learn. The reason it's called epistemic trust is because you can learn from the person who you believe is telling you the truth and who has your interest in mind. And you can't learn from somebody who you don't believe that to be true, because you have to be defensive, you have to be protected. And so in a relationship where you're actually in a collaborative, intimate exchange, you have to feel safe to be willing to be authentic and intimate. And if you don't believe that, you are defended, and it is then either transactional or, in the disorganized end of attachment, a trauma bond. So I say this, I think, every time I talk about it, but I just love the metaphor that Dan Brown used of, for every bite mark, there's a set of teeth. And if you have a lot of trauma, what you're looking for is people whose teeth match your bite marks, so that you have an understanding about who they are and what they're capable of. In secure functioning relationships, one of the ways that safety is established is through these small offerings of trust. You make a small offering of trust, and then you see how somebody does with that. What would a small offering of trust be, for example? Well, you make an agreement to go out to dinner, and you say that you'll meet at a restaurant at 7:30, and when you get it to the restaurant at 7:25, there they are waiting for you to get there, right? Or they come at 7:30 or a few minutes late, whatever it is, but that they're there, and they follow through on things that they say they're going to do in such a way that you don't worry about it once they say that they're going to do it. You just accept that that's their intention. It's likely to happen. And when they say that they're not going to do something, you don't worry about it, because they don't do that. They don't deceive you in any way or manipulate you in any way. They tell you what they're going to do and not do, and then they do that. And so you don't really have to think about it. It's consistent. It's reliable. Is that making sense? Small pieces of trust. In insecure or disorganized relationships, there is some utility for the relationship in not having that sense of reliability. You don't know whether somebody's going to show up. There's a lot of energy, a lot of anxiety about whether they'll show up. When they do show up, there's a massive blast of dopamine that they've showed up. Or when they don't show up, there's a massive blast of adrenaline and cortisol and noradrenaline, all of these chemicals that feel intense, that feel lively, but it also consumes all of the energy of the relationship, all of the energy that's available that you might use for exploration. And if you have anxiety about exploration, what you really want is a reason not to be able to explore, so that you accept, right? That you can use as justification for why you do it and not blame yourself for the fact that you don't do it. Is that making sense? So those little pieces of trust. And then what you begin to do is present conflict in the relationship in a way that you can collaboratively and creatively solve the dilemma of the conflict in a way that feels like a win-win for both people. One of the things about insecure, disorganized relationships, because there's often a power imbalance in the relationship, one party can impose on the other party a solution to a conflict that the other party actually can't live with. And the main way that that's done is by, as I like to say, throwing down the big A card, the big abandonment card. Either you do it this way or I'm out of here. You throw down the abandonment card for somebody who's attached to, and they capitulate. Everybody does. It's not something that really is unusual. But after a little while of trying to live with the deal that you feel like you're losing and you can't do it after a while, and so the conflict resurfaces in the relationship. And then if you negotiate it again in a way that there's a strong power imbalance, or both people don't feel committed to the solution that's come up, that it doesn't feel like a real win-win, then you capitulate, or one person capitulates, but after a while they can't live with it. And so it resurfaces. So what you notice, the main difference is between securely negotiated solutions to conflict and the integration of the two people's conflict resolution systems, is that in a secure way of negotiating, it's a good faith negotiation, and there's a creative solution to the integration, and it feels like a strong win for both parties, so that they're both willing to maintain it over the long period. And if you do that, of course, those conflicts drop out of the relationships because they're settled. They don't rise up again because one person can't continue on with the bad agreement. Is that making sense? And the more of those that you do, the less conflict there is in the relationship. The steadier it gets, the smoother it gets. There's also no highs and lows that come from wondering whether somebody's actually going to show up for you or not. And one of the things that insecure and disorganized people have the hardest time with is giving up the highs and lows, because it feels so much like love. It feels so much like a lively engagement. But what is not factored into this is the exploration piece, that all of that energy that's consumed in stabilizing the relationship is then not available for the exploration. And that those real highs in life tend to come reliably from exploration, not from a relationship. The relationships are essential, of course, in supporting you so that you can take the big risks in your exploration, so that you can find the meaning that you need to find. And that if you don't have that, you don't take the risks that you might need to. And so you find less meaning in exploration. It's not like we can just abandon exploration and settle for uh, 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 an unexamined life. There's a literary phrase about that, something about the unexamined life is not worth living. Mudit?
You were just mentioning about the excuse for not exploring.
Yeah.
You reiterate that part and versus the person's attachment system being on, so he's not capable of exploring. The differentiation, is that the same thing?
Well, the secure people have this dance that's pretty well established in the way that their personality is structured, that when they're frightened and perceive abandonment or some kind of threat, the attachment system engages and they seek proximity to their attachment people. And then when they feel connected and safe, it turns off and the exploration system turns on. And then the different attachment strategies have different relationships to that toggle switch of attachment and exploration. People who grow up to be dismissing suppress the attachment system, and so it doesn't really turn on. So that leaves their exploration system to be on. But because they've grown up typically in households where they have to idealize what the caregivers want of them, and the caregivers often find that the authentic expression of the child is unacceptable, the dismissing person really holds very closely and hidden what essentially matters to them. And they engage instead in secondary exploration, which is the gathering of time, energy, and resources to transact for the care that they want. But they rarely let anybody in on what's really essentially authentic for them, which also means they don't explore the part that's essentially authentic because it's too painful to um, reveal it and then to attempt to pursue it. And so the solution for dismissing people is to begin to present themselves authentically and overcome the strong expectation of the rejection of their authentic core self from other people, and shift out of the secondary exploration into some kind of primary exploration where actually what they're doing is organized around meaning. But in the long way that I'm answering your question, if you're a dismissing person and the primary material is so well protected, the utility of the secondary exploration is essential in terms of transacting care. You have to have resources in order to transact care, and you don't believe that anybody would just do that for you. The excuse that you use for not doing the primary exploration is that you have to gather the resources in order to be taken care of. And that feels essential. Even when the resources are abundant, it still feels essential, which is the excuse not to do the primary exploration. And actually, because there's been so little attention and investigation into what is primary, it may not even register that that would be something to explore rather than something just to protect. Makes sense? Preoccupied people, on the other hand, have the experience in childhood of their exploration being interfered with or limited in some way. And preoccupied people come in two main directions. One is the helpless end of it, and one is the controlling end of it. Let's say that you grew up in a household where your caregiver was a controlling, preoccupied person. They would so micromanage everything that you attempted to do and interfere with all of the development of the ways that you might do it by insisting that you do it in the way that they think it would be done, that you lose any sense of being able to explore on your own or any sense of how you would discover the way to do it that would make sense. And you'd be in this bind that is both controlled and helpless. You're helpless to figure out the way that you might do it that would be satisfying, and you have to satisfy the person that's in control, or there's conflict. And so you abandon any sense of your own exploration in favor of this trap of control, being controlled and helpless at the same time. On the helpless end of it, you simply recognize that the way to gather attention from your caregivers is by being helpless. And the way that that appears is really that the child presents himself as helpless and then the caregiver does it. Have you ever been around a caregiver who a child is asking for a question or asking for help to do something, and the caregiver just pushes them aside and does it for them, which is emphasizing the helplessness of the child. So, of course, if a child did break out of that and attempt to explore on their own, which often happens, what they encounter when they return from their exploration, and in that exchange of exploration that we're all looking for, you go out and you explore and you discover something, you come back to the people that are close to you and you tell them what you've discovered, and what you're hoping for, of course, is that they're interested in it. They're engaged in it. They're delighted that you're telling them because it's useful to them that you've discovered this, and they love your point of view and your take on things, which is different than theirs. And because it gives them an expanded view of something, it enriches their experience. But in the childhood of somebody who has the demand of being helpless, that attempts to explore, when they come back, of course, they're punished for it. And so they begin to associate a loss of affection with exploration and succeeding in discovering what you need to know. And that creates this cycle of procrastination, or that's mainly how we think of it, procrastination or fear of success. The closer you get to succeeding, the greater the anxiety is. The anxiety is about making yourself unlovable. It's not about whether the task is finished or not, or even about how the task is received. That is, if you finish something, if you explore something, and you come back and you want to express it, you're going to be punished for doing that. And so you delay the punishment by delaying the finishing of whatever it is that you're working on. Yudi.
Hi, George. Hi, everyone. Is this also a Dharma class? This one?
This is actually a Dharma class, yeah.
Oh, great.
And you're wondering how we're going to get there. I have that in mind.
Oh, great, great. Hey.
Did you have a question beyond that?
I guess I am interested about your Dharma lineage. I vaguely have an impression you studied Theravada and Bon.
Yes, both of those are true.
So you study Abhidhamma as well?
I have.
Oh, wonderful. Because I have an interest in learning it.
Oh, I probably am not the teacher for that.
Oh,
I started meditating in the 60s. I'm in my 70s, so it's a long history, but I don't but I will give you the sort of later part. In 92, I moved to LA from New York. In New York, I was really mainly involved in Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching. And but when I got out here, I studied at a place called Ordinary Dharma with Catriona Reed and Michelle. I think Benjamin is how you say her last name. And they taught a Thich Nhat Hanh version of, I would say, Zen Theravadan, because, Thich Nhat Hanh was a Zen practitioner, but they taught mindfulness, basically. But I didn't find enough of a sense of safety there, and I should really say that it had nothing to do with Catriona and the song. It's that I was really not able to integrate very well into different groups of people, and I have such a high standard of kindness from a teacher that the Zen brusque approach was too unkind for me. I couldn't bear it. And so I became a Dharma orphan, which I had been quite a bit. I would say most of my Dharma life, I have been a Dharma orphan. A Dharma orphan is a teacherless student who attempts to understand the teaching of the Dharma through books and personal practice without actually having any coaching. I strongly recommend actually that you don't do the Dharma orphan path or do as little as you can, because you go so much faster if you have a teacher that you can listen to. In 1998, I started to study with Shinzen, and Shinzen was absolutely kind enough for me and disengaged enough for me that I didn't feel any pressure in terms of participating. And the Sangha felt safe to me. And so I studied there for 25 years. And at one time was a VSI facilitator. VSI is the Vipassana Support Institute, which is his organization. Then I started to study at Against the Stream Buddhist Meditation Society, which was Noah Levine's group. And I did teacher training there and became an empowered meditation teacher through them. And they were, at that time, part of the Spirit Rock lineage. And so the teaching was Theravada and a combination of the different Tibetan practitioners that came through, and Upadita and the Vipassana approach and the loving kindness metta approach that Sharon Salzberg was teaching.
Oh.
And then in 2017, I started to study Bon with Dan Brown. And mainly my personal practice is organized around Mahamudra from the Bon lineage. How's that?
Good. Wonderful.
I do prefer to describe things in Buddhist terms rather than in mindfulness terms, because you'll notice in Western, in particular in the United States, in Buddhism, because we have, our culture is the culture of appropriation. We just grab everything from everywhere, assemble it in its own thing, and discard everything that we don't like. And so we have these kinds of mashups of teachings that are really all of the lineages from everywhere rolled up into one thing. And then all of the terms are secularized, so you don't really have any idea at all what it is that's being taught to you under the rubric of mindfulness. So I am not an empowered bond teacher. When I said to Dan, I think I would like to become an empowered bond teacher, and he said, "Oh no, you're way too old." I said, "Really? How old do you have to be?" And he said, "Well, it takes 20 years to become a teacher. And how old are you?" And I said, at the time I was 65. And he said, "So you'll be 85 when you start teaching, and we want to get 20 years of teaching out of you. So you're going to be 105 when you retire from teaching?" I said, "No, I hope to be long dead by the time I'm 105." So he said, "We only take people in their 20s so that when in their 40s they emerge as a teacher, then we can get 20 years of teaching out of them before they retire in their 60s. So that was fine. So I teach what I'm empowered to teach, and I don't teach what I'm not empowered to teach, because somewhere along the way I figured out that it's okay to follow the rules. Because that makes people feel safe, which is where we really started, right? With this whole conversation. If you feel safe with me teaching, that what that really means is you believe that I'm telling you the truth, right? That I'm intending to tell you the truth. And that the reason I'm telling you what I'm telling you is because I'm intending to be helpful to you, and I'm not trying to get something from you that would be satisfying in some way to me that you would not, if you knew that that's what I wanted from you, wouldn't want to give it to me, which would be some kind of manipulation, which I really don't do. And I'm so hyper vigilant around that because I grew up in such an exploitive, painful, harmful household that I can't bear the idea of doing it to anyone. And so I want to talk about, and the reason that I teach the way that I do, and that you would ask the question about whether this is actually a Dharma talk or not, is I want to do my job as the teacher, which is to transliterate the teachings through me and my experience, and then language it in a way that is relevant to our culture. I don't and have never found the poetry of 2,500 years ago compelling as a source of information, because it was too hard to translate it into what was relevant for me, and also relevant for the people who study with me. So I like to talk about it in the terms of our current culture. So that's mainly why I do this. And in the West, of course, the way that we talk about resolving issues of personality is through psychology and psychologic references. When I was talking to Dan about this, he said that what he thought actually was going to be the best benefit for the people in the West was a translation of the Buddhist teaching into Western psychological terms. And I know that that's something that some people appreciate and some people don't appreciate. In lineage holdings, there's often a conflict around this. And I can give you an example of that related to the Abhidhamma. When I was in Myanmar studying with Indica Sayadaw, he presented the metta jhanas and compared them to the Vipassana jhanas and the stages of them. And then the following day, some Western nuns presented the same thing, but they presented a different series of stages for Vipassana jhana. That is to say, he presented uh, the framework of the Vipassana jhanas from the Buddhist canon, and they presented the frame for the Vipassana jhanas from the Abhidharma, which are different. And so, being a smartass, I raised my hand and I asked the Sayadaw why there was a contradiction in the teaching between the two, and which one he preferred. And he said that he preferred the language of the Abhidharma, but that he was a monastic in a lineage and had to teach the canon because that was what the lineage demanded. Is that making sense? I am not constrained in that way, so I'm free to make up a language of the teaching. And I think one of the things in the West that we're all looking for is somebody who relates the Dharma to us in a language that we can understand the meaning. And this is really one of the essential pieces in terms of the sense of safety that you have with somebody. You understand what it is that you want to, what you understand the experience that you are having. You understand what about that you want to express to somebody else, and then you transliterate it into terms that they can understand what you're talking about. And then you receive from them their reaction to the teaching that you've offered, ensuring that you understand that they've understood you, and you understand what their response is, so that you can modify your understanding of the relationship in a way that then moves the understanding between you and the intimacy between you forward. Is that making sense? But when it comes to having a Dharma teacher, I think you want to have somebody where you don't have to transliterate it that much, right? Because it's too easy to get lost in the different meanings that each of us have. We don't live in a world of what's happening, and we don't really share the experience of what's happening. We live in a world of what it means to us based on our particular conditioning. And what we're attempting to do is relate our conditioned response to things to somebody else and their conditioned response to something else. That's actually what that communication is. And so in the West, I really think that the preliminary practices are to be able to understand that, because they begin to represent the obstacles to fruition on the path. And so you can have a dialogue of what is the ground, or what is the groundless ground? What is the ground, you might say, of your conditioning? And how does it relate to the ground of my conditioning, so that we can begin to recognize the obstacles that are between our understanding each other? And if we can then remove those obstacles, we can actually succeed in relating to each other in a way that's intimate and caring. And we can actually learn how to take care of each other, and then take on that obligation. Really, the function of secure relationships is you take on the obligation to take care of somebody in the way that they need. And they take on the obligation to take care of you in the way that you need. And there's that mutuality to it, so that you're both well taken care of. What do you get out of that? You get a caregiver for yourself who's really well taken care of, and they get a caregiver for themselves who's really well taken care of, so that you can provide that care in an easy, ongoing way. Makes sense. So that we could be talking about, for instance, lust, or we could be talking about craving and aversion, or we could talk about restlessness and agitation, or we could talk about sloth and torpor, we could talk about equanimity. But we could also talk about the view of an attachment strategy and its conditioning, and how it makes the view of the world look to you, and how that view causes you to relate to other people in a way. And it seems to me to be richer to do the latter than it is to talk about the poetry of 2.5 millennia ago. So that's my preference. Obviously not for everyone, but for some people, it works pretty well. That makes sense. So how do you feel safe in a relationship? You feel safe in a relationship because you believe that somebody's telling you the truth, and you believe that they have your interest in mind, and you believe that if you show them in a vulnerable way what is authentically true for you, that they will receive that and often delight in who you are. That's how it goes. But in order to get there, you have to be able to go in these little steps. Now, in order to be able to understand that, you have to be able to practice in a way that is illuminated for you. And so one of the practices that I really like in terms of understanding this is the Metta practice that Indigo Sayadaw taught, because it teaches how to monitor view. Does that make sense? So we have the capacity to sense the object that can be sensed. When there's contact, consciousness of the sensing experience arises. It's evaluated for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter whether we get to it? Is there time for a pleasant experience? And then it's mapped onto the perceptual database. And if there's a meaning in the database that matches closely enough, that whole meaning thread is attached and it rolls into conceptual reality. Between ultimate reality and conceptual reality is a place where the views go. And the views can be distorting. So we might say, if the mind is filled with lust, it's as if, as the Buddha used the metaphor of a mirror, which was a bowl of water, the water is dyed a bright color. And so we don't experience anything directly. We experience it as a reflection off the surface of the mind. And if the bowl is dyed a bright color, then the image that's reflected off the surface of the mind is filled with bright colors, you might say. In Western psychology, we might say glow, that the person in front of you is glowing because you recognize in them the likelihood that they will take care of you in the way that you understand what love is, which comes from the definitions of your family system. And so if you grew up in an insecure, a disorganized family system, what you're recognizing is somebody who will take care of you in the way that you were taken care of in your insecure, disorganized family system, which might not be the ultimate choice for a secure relationship, but certainly they're glowing, right? Can you recognize when the mind is there or not? You might say that the mind is aversive or angry or filled with aversion, and then notice that the way that the world appears to you, the way that other people appear to you, the way that you appear to yourself is distorted from an equanimous point of view. Or is the mind restless, and how does that affect things? Is the mind filled with sloth and torpor? Is the mind equanimous? So we want to track view. So the way that you track view and the way that we practice is by doing loving kindness and learning to track the view of loving kindness. And in learning to track a particular view of loving kindness, you begin to recognize other views. Then you develop the agency to control which view you allow in the mind. The Buddha said that you want to guard the sense gates. You don't want to just leave them open so that any kind of experience can arise from that. And then we need to understand our thought processes. The Buddha also talked about suppressing afflictive thinking in 5 levels, the first of which is simply straight up thought replacement. The third level, which is one of my favorites, is to shout the beneficial phrase louder in the mind than the mind is shouting the afflictive phrase. And the 5th one is to annihilate the afflictive thought at any cost, which I also thought was pretty good. Christian.
I don't know if you've noticed, but the level of violence is going up as the positivity is going up too. I don't know much more than annihilate what comes after that.
Loving kindness.
I have
Yeah.
a question about this. My question is, it makes sense to have, like, my understanding is to have good karma that take up the space so that it squeezes the bad karma out of down the line, so that bad karma is not ripening because all the good karma is taking up space. And
Right.
then and however, when we're talking about the annihilation and shouting, that is only like an attempt to replacing the bad karma of good karma, right? Because my experience with observing negative afflictive emotion, especially in my clients, is that the more they try to get rid of it, get avoid it, which has something to do with they are bad with emotional regulation, the more the bad karma actually stays and then gets
So
stronger.
you're thinking that emotion and thought and thinking are necessarily the same.
Mm.
So you replace an afflictive thought, I'm a terrible person, with a positive thought, I'm a good person. And if the mind doesn't just simply allow the swap, then the mind is saying, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad person. And then you're in the chorus going, no, you're a good person. No, you're a good person. No, you're a good person. The activity of thinking, so the auditory visual thinking is one aspect, and the emotion is another aspect, and they are omnidirectional in terms of their reactivity. But what the Buddha is talking about is the cognitive process, not the emotional process in that.
Oh, okay.
So policing your cognitive sense gate in a way.
Mm.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And also, when we explore this with the different meditation strategies that we use, you have an emotion. The emotion exceeds the window of tolerance, and so you have an emotional event that needs to be regulated. And then the mind switches on the thought pattern that you use to regulate the thought that's exceeded the window of tolerance. And you learn that thought process in your family system as part of the conflict resolution system and how your family manages that. So then what you want to do is examine that. So part of this process is to examine the thought patterns that you use to regulate, and then prevent yourself from using the afflictive strategy and insisting that the mind use a beneficial strategy instead, which would be a loving kindness technique, say, or a noting feeling states technique. And so each time you notice that the mind is using a negative anger generating thought, you prevent the mind from thinking that, and you insist that the mind think a positive thought that generates a positive emotional response rather than, say, anger or fear or sadness. Neither thought is true, right? The thought that you're thinking to regulate the reaction to the present moment, neither one of them is actually more than just a strategy to calm and regulate the mind. Which one is better is really the whole discussion.
I see. That makes sense. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, we did.
Sorry, to jump back on the safety piece, I think you almost reached at the disorganized stage of things. And I was wondering if the protocol of the three-pillar approach is the only way, and it's a very solo adventure, especially for working with people. I mean, I thought it's like the IPF. Do you see patients or suddenly doing IPF or the three-pillar approach and feeling safe in the everyday environment?
The using ideal parent figure protocol to help a disorganized person overcome the perception that they're in danger is about visualizing protection. So they visualize the ideal parent figures protecting them in all situations, and they visualize ideal parent figures as powerful enough to protect them in any situation, or powerful enough to get them out of a bad situation. One of the things that characterizes disorganized people is dissociation, but what also characterizes disorganized people is a constant intrusion of past trauma. And so there needs to be some attention to that as well, so that you can begin to resolve some of those intrusions. The reason why the intrusions are so difficult to manage usually is because they're dissociative states, so they're timeless and out of order in terms of the timeline, so that they can be experienced as if the threat is real now rather than the threat was something that was in the past. And so that protection piece is necessary, but also in disorganized people, dissociation is the primary means of emotional regulation. So you have to teach robust emotional regulation strategies that you can use to replace the dissociation as the primary means. And that's the meditation stuff again, meditation-based emotional regulation strategies that they can develop through practice, that they can then use instead of the dissociation to regulate the present moment experience. For disorganized people to feel safe, they would have to be willing to present themselves authentically to somebody else. And because they're afraid that if they express themselves authentically, the person will exploit them and harm them. They don't, because it's too great of a risk. And so what needs to happen there is to develop the sense that you can pick people who will be harmful to you and people who won't be harmful to you. One of the reasons why disorganized people are convinced that they're going to be hurt over and over again is because they're so defensive in the way that they relate to other people, that those defenses defeat almost everybody except people who are predators. Because the predators are used to having to break down that level of defense in order to get in. And so for disorganized people, they eliminate relationships with everyone else because nobody else is willing to attempt to get through the defenses. And so they end up in relationships over and over again with people who are willing to batter down the defenses to get in, or they get seduced by it. One of the chief means of seduction of disorganized people is kindness, because they overvalue kindness. They grew up in such astonishingly cruel environments where kindness was rare. They value kindness as a rarity. And so that if you express it to them, they feel it's, almost tearful that you're expressing kindness to them. But if you grow up in a secure household, kindness is like air. It's like water. It is common. It is ordinary. It is the whole structure of the relationship, basically. And so that is a more appropriate valuing than this this deeply moving expression and feeling that comes from really ordinary levels of kindness, if that makes sense. So they're easily seduced through expressions of kindness, but they're also very defended, and nobody sticks around for that level of defense, really, except for other disorganized people, really, because you get a pass for that from another disorganized person because they're doing it too.
It's a funny insight that came to my mind recently is coming from India, where it's very ordinary for a rural or a normal person to express their protection through God. Like if you meet somebody, they'll be like, oh no, this is very stressful, but I know God will take care of it.
Right.
And it's like a very common saying, like, even my mom sometimes like she will take care of it. And I realized from that point of view, it's actually more secure, it's more protection giving than somebody who's an atheist who doesn't believe in anything and who's disorganized. Will be struggling much more.
Well, that is an expression of the expectation of a positive outcome, right? You expect it to turn out well because God is going to take care of it.
Like it's like the same as IPF in some sense, right? You're visualizing a protective figure
Right.
who's going to take it. So from that point of view, the people there would be happier than an atheist who's,
So you feel safe
yeah, you feel safe,
and
even though it's
protected.
imaginary. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty cool.
Yudi.
George, can you say more about the peripheral memory that you mentioned? And then is meditation a unique strategy to access that memory? And if IPF can be replaced with watching very wholesome movies or TV shows, since that's also fictional and imaginary.
So intrusive memory is what you mean?
Oh, no, peripheral memory. You said something about, is it called peripheral memory?
I said intrusive, I think. Did I?
From first class of level 1, you said
Oh,
something about there's two types of memory. One is automatic, one is something start with P.
okay. I got you now. One is procedural,
Procedural. Oh, okay.
and one is autobiographical. Procedural memory is unconscious, and autobiographical memory is conscious, and and really the foundation of the self experience. Um, Procedural memory is when you get up to walk across the room, do you have to think which muscles to trigger to get you to stand up, and then which muscles to trigger to walk yourself across the room? You probably don't. That's procedural. Do you have to remember how to drive a car? Do you remember how you learned to drive a car if you can drive a car, right? 10 and 2 on the wheel and looking at the mirrors and looking all around and lurching forward, slamming on the brake, lurching forward, slamming on the brake. I taught my friend Mark Ellen to drive stick, and she would inevitably stall and flood the car, and we'd lurch forward and have to sit there for 5 minutes, and then she'd lurch forward and we'd have to sit there for 5 minutes. And we both found that hilarious. So really what we would do is lurch forward, stall, flood, and laugh for 5 minutes. And so it was a very pleasant experience to do it. But the people behind us were not so entertained. But eventually she could drive the stick, smoke a cigarette, and drink a coffee and steer with her knee, and it was all fine, right? That's procedural memory. So the question then about those two.
Um, like, like you mentioned something in first class of level 1 that how meditation is very important, something about how it's fast enough so that you update the procedural memory. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so meditation works at the procedural memory level. It doesn't work at the autobiographical memory level. You can sit there and think you've had a terrible meditation period, and then nothing is happening and it's worthless. But then you'll notice that you're just different because the perceptual procedural memory has been changed, whereas the autobiographical memory just had a painful, unpleasant sit. So they're two different things. And meditation tends to change the perceptual database. And ideal parent figure changes the perceptual database. It doesn't do so much for the autobiographical memory because the self experience largely stays the same. what you notice if you do the work is that you're acting completely different than you used to act, and there's no explanation for it because the self experience is largely the same. You're just sort of going, oh, I'm doing something completely different than I have ever done before. It's just how it goes. I mean, in that working, because you're changing the database that you use to create the meaning of the present moment. And admittedly, these little visualizations that you stack into the database are just imaginary. But the way that the human body mind resolves novel experiences by using the imagination to create meaning. So it's not outside the parameters in any way of what the system is. It's really just a keen understanding of what it is. But if you make these entries, which are remembered, and you use them as the definition for the experience of the present moment, then you make a reality that you then remember. And so in addition to the visualized experience, you're actually stacking on top of it actual experiences or actual memory that come from the perception of what's happening. And over time, they become quite robust. And you leave behind the earlier conditioning, because the new version works better and the mind is really calorie sensitive. If you can find a solution to an experience that's lower calorie than the one you've been currently using, the mind will abandon the high calorie approach and go low calorie, because it's all about conserving energy. So if you can notice that feeling frightened and withdrawing is a high calorie approach to relating, but actually going slowly and introducing yourself and expressing yourself is the lower calorie solution, the mind will do that. And then you'll find that the obstacles that had existed before that prevented you from doing that don't arise anymore. So you don't have to push through them anymore, so that you can just go do it. But the experience of self watching you do it is the same. If that makes sense. It's a little bit of a paradox, but you feel largely unchanged, but you're doing something that you've never been able to do before, with no explanation as to why that would be, except that you've done these dopey meditations for 6 months. Right?
Cool.
Exactly. Really cool. So we've gabbed away. What do you think about doing a little meditation? Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that? Good. So Saturday we have what do we have on Saturday? It's the last day of the meditation and addiction training, I think, the level 1. And then we just started a level 2, and we will close out the registration for that, if you're thinking about it, on the 4th of March. So you have until that time. And then we're going to do a workshop on Friday night, this Friday night, for people who are in the helping professions, who are interested in our approach to attachment repair. So we're going to talk a little bit more on the technical side of the practice of that than I normally do, with a non-helping professional audience. What else is happening? And then in March, we're going to begin a series of level 1s for that particular cohort. So a deeper dive into the meditation and attachment process that we use, but also from the facilitator. We'll talk more openly about the facilitator side of it. And then we will begin in April a level 2 for the for that group starting on the 25th of April. So that's the stuff that's coming up. If you're interested in any of it, take a look. And then I hope to see you soon. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're resourced and you can, you'll make a donation. There's a link on the website to make a donation. Any amount is useful. It helps support me and the work that Mettagroup does. Really appreciate your practice. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
George.